Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We may be only hours away from the draft deal between David Cameron and the rest of the EU on the terms of the negotiation, which will fire the starting gun for our in-out European referendum. For those who want to leave the EU, the current polling isn't very reassuring. Luke Johnson is a leading business advocate for Vote Leave, one of the competing Brexit campaigns. Before we get on to that, Luke, you've been a big critic of Google. What did you make of what Peter Barron was saying just now?
Well, I thought it was very confusing, and I thought it confirmed to me that Google organises its affairs so as to avoid tax. And considering the chairman of Google claims that they operate to the highest ethical standards, I find that hypocritical.
As somebody who runs many businesses in the UK, paying full whack corporation tax on everything, what do you think of the idea that corporation tax itself has become unfit for purpose and we need a thorough revision of business taxation in this country?
I agree with that, and I think our 17,000-page tax code is far too long and complex, and it creates these loopholes. So I think the entire thing needs rethinking, and I think corporation tax doesn't work as it's currently structured.
Let's move on to Europe then. David Cameron has his negotiations with Mr Tusk later on today, and the briefing is that he's going to get, or he's trying to get, an emergency break on in-work benefits for migrants, which might last for 7 years until the whole thing can be renegotiated. Is that the kind of breakthrough that would make you change your mind about leaving the EU?
No, I think it's relatively trivial, and I'm afraid to say that I think the negotiations of supposed reforms that Cameron is attempting at the moment are effectively condescending to us because they're a device. They're not going to lead to much change, and I fear it's not going to address the fundamental issues such as ending ever closer union that the EU is committed to.
The Governor of the Bank of England, Marr, has said that leaving the EU would cause a flight of capital, it would cause interest rates to go up and lots of economic chaos to this country. Why is he wrong?
If you look back a few years ago when there was debate about whether we should join the euro, those that said that sterling was finished and that if we didn't join the euro, Britain's economy would be doomed, were proved utterly wrong. And very many of the same voices are raised now saying that if we leave the EU, we're doomed. And I think that they should not talk down our national interests. I think Britain is the 5th largest economy in the world. The city is the leading financial centre in the world. We have a great independent future, just as countries like Norway and Switzerland enjoy.
Are you concerned that David Cameron is trying to, as it were, bounce the country into an early referendum in June? He's got a poll lead at the moment. He's going to come out with this big negotiation success, perhaps, and that, in a way, the Brexit campaign is being pushed to the side by the steamroller of the establishment.
I think that is going on, and that's why I think it's important that both sides of the argument are heard. The reason why we're having a referendum is because this is a democracy, and I think it's important that people are informed and decide for themselves whether they think the current system works, whether it's good for our economy and our culture and our society, or whether we deserve the freedom and independence of continuing successfully outside the EU.
Now, you've said in the past that one of the problems you have as an employer is that too many of your employees are kind of amateur lawyers with an inflated sense of their own burgeoning rights. A lot of people would say the point of the EU is it has given workers more rights, and that's a good thing.
Yes, but what's important in life is that people get good jobs, and the EU has, generally speaking, in its existence, been a job destruction machine. And the fact that many countries in the EU, for example, have much higher levels of unemployment is demonstration that the EU isn't necessarily very effective at creating jobs. And this country is.
We're seeing the collapse of the Schengen Agreement, borders going up all over the EU, huge rows inside the EU about migration and about economics. Do you think we're seeing the end of the EU?
I think it could break up, and I think new collaborations will have to then arise. We'll have to see, but certainly I think it's facing, with the possible departure of Britain and the collapse of the Schengen Agreement, the biggest threats to its existence for many years.
On the Brexit side, there are now competing campaigns. I think there's 3 competing campaigns. This is your one chance, probably in your lifetime and in my lifetime, to get Britain out of the EU. Isn't it totally depressing that the Brexit side is fighting amongst itself? There's been this report of a coup against Dominic Cummings, who's the Conservative advisor, leading Vote Leave and so forth. What's your take on that?
I'm nothing to do with any of the organisation of these campaigns. I'm merely an individual with my personal views about our economy and the prospects for the EU. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a businessman, and I think we should look at the facts and not get involved in the politics of which campaign is which, and focus on, is the EU good for Britain or not?
Now, you've created a lot of jobs in your time through Pizza Express and many other businesses. Are you convinced that outside the EU you would be able to create more jobs than if we stay in? I'm
convinced that Britain is a very viable economy. We attract record levels of foreign direct investment. We actually export less to the EU than they export to us. They need us, and I think we will have a very viable and successful time outside the EU.
And to win this battle, what's most important? Is it to talk about immigration and migration, or is it to talk about our economic future outside the EU?
I think all the aspects of the EU matter, and I think that what's good about this debate in the referendum is that it gives a chance for both sides to set up their camps and explain to the public what the benefits and deficits of the EU are and decide for themselves. And I think it's democracy in action. I think it's very healthy.
Luke Johnson, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us this morning.
I've been